Good afternoon. Thank you for staying with us here on CBS News New York. Big breaking news day. We just learned that 3rd District of the Congress in New York, George Santos, pleading not guilty to 13 counts. Marcia, this news all coming fast. We learned the counts of the indictment. Let's talk about that, as well as your reaction to his plea.
Well, first of all, it's very serious because he could face 20 years in jail if he gets convicted. And so that's a very serious thing. But here you and I were talking about it. I looked up something and I found out that, believe it or not, even if he gets convicted, he could actually serve in Congress because there's only 3 qualifications for being a congressman. You have to be 25 years of age. You have to have been in the country 7 years. We have to find out if he's actually been a citizen for 7 years, because who knows. And you have to live in the district that you've been elected in. So there's nothing in the law, in federal law, that says he can't serve even if he's convicted. However, reality says that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to challenge him. I can tell you that right off the bat, Ed Cox, the state Republican chairman, says he's out. We're not backing him. We're not supporting him. We're going to run somebody against him. But let's talk about the charges.
Yes.
Wire fraud, money laundering, stealing public funds, lying about his financial disclosure. Now, the thing that I thought was I was struck by were several things. Number one, he, believe it or not, filed for unemployment insurance right after the pandemic, saying he wasn't employed, while at the same time he was collecting $120,000 a year salary from a Florida company. So he was collecting money, said he was unemployed, collected $24,000 in unemployment insurance that should have gone to people who lost their jobs during the pandemic. So to me, that was like, oh my God, a wow moment. But there's also other charges that I think are really, troubling. For example, he's alleged to have convinced numbers of people to contribute to his campaign. 2 people alone contributed each $25,000. That's $50,000. He told them that was going to go for TV campaign commercials. According to the indictment, he's charged with using that for designer clothes to pay off his credit card bills and so-called personal expenses. Now, I want to tell you that when he was a guest on The Point this past Sunday, we were talking about some of the things he might have been spending money on. Now, we don't know whether he spent this money on personal expenses, but one of the personal expenses he talked about was, believe it or not, getting Botox.
Let's listen.
Here's a great one. People like to make fun of me. Oh, he has fake lips. He has Botox. He has this. I'm like, well, at least I could afford it. Most people.
Do you have fake lips?
Oh, Marcia.
I mean, you brought it up.
Marcia, I wouldn't tell you that.
You wouldn't tell me that? Here we're having this wonderful conversation. You won't, after you brought it up?
I represent Long Island. I can't tell you these things. These are trade secrets.
Then I can actually tell you that during the break, he did say that he did spend money on Botox, but we want to stress that there's no indication that Botox injections was one of the things he spent this campaign money on. But there was, he spent a lot of money on various personal expenses, and that's a major charge. But also, there's other questions where they said that he lied to the federal government about how much income he had. For example, he claimed he made $750,000 in income, and they say that was an absolute lie. They also say that he said he had received between $1 and $5 million in dividends from his investment company. They say that's an absolute lie as well. Now, the reason why that becomes important is because one of the things the House is looking at is he said on his financial disclosure forms that he made for the campaign that he was contributing his own money to the campaign. And in fact, just for the record, I asked him about that House investigation and how he was going to explain the money that he said he contributed. Let's take a listen to that.
Well, look, it's an ongoing investigation of the facts, and I'm not going to comment on ongoing investigations. It's irresponsible and it's not prudent, but I've been compliant and giving everything that's asked of me.
So,
makes you wonder who has been giving other information, right? How does this investigation reach this point?
Well, what we know is this: there was first there were news stories talking about how he had lied about certain things about his resume, and that prompted a deeper investigation into his finances. And if you read the indictment that was handed down today in the federal courthouse, what it says is that there were various campaign operatives that apparently testified before the grand jury because they're referenced in the indictment that was brought down. So clearly, members of his campaign staff have been called into the grand jury to testify about what they knew. But remember, we're talking about two campaigns. He ran in 2020 in a failed campaign. He lost to Tom Suozzi, and he ran again this past year because Tom Suozzi was running for governor, so it was an open seat. And it was one of several Republican seats that went Republican in the last election.
Which is a whole, and we will get to that part of the conversation too, because of the impact on the makeup of congressional seats for New York. Some reaction here. First of all, Governor Hochul spoke earlier today and called for Santos to resign. Let's listen what she had to say.
But these are charges. We'll see what comes, but if there's a conviction, obviously there's an automatic removal from office. But in the meantime, he continues, and I think he should just do the right thing and put this district out of its misery and move on.
We've been speaking about other people who are reacting today to the 13-count indictment, and now he has said not guilty. People before talking about not only resigning, but him being expelled.
Right. In fact, Tony Gonzalez of Texas, a very conservative Democrat, called on him to use the E word, expel, as opposed to the R word, resign. But also, interestingly enough, Mike Lawler, who is an upstate Republican congressman, also elected in November, called on him to be expelled or resign as well, just today. So there is a growing number of people in his own party that are calling on him to step aside. Of course, he so far has refused to do that.
Marcia, we have CBS 2's Carolyn Gusoff outside the courthouse in Central Islip, where all of this just happened. The congressman pleading not guilty. Carolyn, tell us what it was like in the courtroom and any reaction you've gotten so far.
Sure, Dana. First of all, there was a tremendous amount of anticipation. There was a line down the hallway on that 8th floor of the courthouse behind me that stretched for hours, and then the courtroom was packed to the gills, mostly with members of the media, also Santos's chief of staff, and a few members of the public, and of course prosecutors. Santos walked in wearing his signature blue blazer and blue sweater vest and his dark black glasses. He had a very grim, serious expression. He sat down right next to his attorney, Joseph Murray, and they chatted a little bit, but he looked very serious and, as I said, grim. And then the judge asked him a series of questions to which he answered yes, ma'am, to all of them. The judge asked, do you understand your right not to make statements, your Fifth Amendment right? He said, yes, ma'am. Did you go over the indictment with your attorney? Do you understand the charges against you? Yes, ma'am. And then he was asked if he waived a reading of the charges, which he did, but the judge just summarized them for him, basically defrauding political supporters, theft of unemployment proceeds, and also overstating his income. He said he understood all of the charges against him. And then the issue of bond, it's been secured by 3 people, a $500,000 bond, $500,000. We're told by sources that one of those people is his father, who we have not heard too much of in this whole several-month ordeal. He was then told, or the court actually was told, that he had surrendered his passport. And then the issue of the conditions of his release, that he's allowed only to travel to the district, Long Island, New York City, and Washington, D.C., but that with certain permissions, he'd be allowed to travel outside of those 3 areas. He'd have to have it approved first by the court, and his attorney Murray got up and explained that he's running for re-election election extraordinarily in these circumstances, and that he would have to be traveling perhaps to fundraisers, and the judge acknowledged that and said that with permission that would be allowed. And with that, history was made, but he was really expressionless, looked very serious, as I said. The follow-up date was set for June 30th at noon, and so begins this case. He waived the right to a speedy trial, and the judge explained to him that gives not only the prosecutors a chance to build their case, but also the defense a chance to possibly take a disposition in this case, and that means some kind of plea. So that remains to be seen. He left through the custody door. That means he's still in custody. It'll take us some time, maybe 15 minutes, for him to be processed. He's not getting one of those monitoring bracelets. We know that. He's not getting a GPS bracelet. The $500,000 bond is what will secure his return to court. And then, just like any other defendant, he'll be walking out that door behind me in a little while with his attorney, who's been with him throughout this whole thing. He's not a special, federal court attorney. Joseph Murray will be by his side, and he told reporters earlier that he's feeling good and that he looks forward to the opportunity now to finally address these charges. So we certainly expect to hear from George Santos and his attorney Murray as they come out, but we're still waiting for that, and really not a whole lot of members of the public here.
That's interesting.
Like I said, just a few.
Right, and as you said, like any other person walking out, except a few steps, then he's walking into the state capitol. I mean, this is just the nation's capital, extraordinary. Also, Carolyn, one of the things we've been looking at, a couple of the conversations he had with Marcia on the point, big laugh, confidence. We've watched him when the McCarthy vote, sitting there, right after the election, and just again going over George Santos's demeanor again. Can you talk about that again today?
Sure. I mean, he's famously minimized all of his admitted lies. He's written them off as, mistakes, and everybody makes mistakes, and, no reason why he shouldn't remain in his seat in Congress. He's faced the court of public opinion, and now he's facing a federal court, so things are much different, and his demeanor was markedly different. I mean, very serious. Who could not be in front of a federal judge? But we'll see how he is when he comes out. It'll be interesting to see these. As Marcia was saying, some of these are very serious charges. They don't all involve a huge dollar amount, but the violation of the public trust, some of them, including money laundering and fraud, I believe carry a sentence of up to 20 years. So these are significant charges, and it'll be interesting to see if we have the same George Santos who has, laughed off a lot of his misrepresentations in the past. The whole, Jewish, everything was humorous to him. It'll be interesting to see if he's lost his sense of humor today. But in the courtroom, he was dead serious, and just basically chatting with his attorney, going over paperwork, and not so much as a grin.
Marcia jumping in here.
Well, Carolyn, I know that you cover a lot of people in Long Island, and you talk to a lot of people. I wonder what you think about him continuing to run for office. I mean, the fact that he has decided he's still going to run, and he even told the judge today he was going to be running despite this indictment, and he was going to be going to fundraisers. I mean, what's your take on that, and how the people in Long Island in the 3rd District are going to relate to the fact that he's still running?
Well, I mean, his support really has never been, since this whole scandal has broken, has never been from Long Island. I mean, even the Republican Party of Nassau County has had a unified voice calling for him to resign. They won't have anything to do with him. The town supervisors throughout Long Island who were Republicans have not had anything to do with him, and his constituents, overwhelmingly, I think it was more than 70%, have called for him to step down or for his expulsion. So this is only strengthening the calls for now there to be a House resolution and a vote by Speaker McCarthy to expel him. So I don't think he will have lost any supporters on Long Island by this indictment, because he lost them months ago when these allegations were first made, and he admitted to the fabrications of virtually his entire persona. So you asked Marcia, will it change anything? I think if anything, it'll just amplify the calls. I already interviewed several people this morning who have, throughout called for him to resign or be expelled, and they're calling this vindication. If now this does not come to a House vote, they're saying that, they'll be on, those who stand in favor of him will be on the wrong side of history at this point.
Carolyn, before we let you go, we know we'll be coming back with you. Just to confirm, the congressman and his attorney are still in the building, and the people behind you, cameras are set up, and if they're going to speak, we'll be able to see that, correct?
Correct. That's a line of the media waiting for George Santos and his attorney, Joe Murray, and possibly his chief of staff, who's with him as well. You'll see him in a very bright royal blue suit. Also will be coming out and presumably will speak to the media, and of course we'll bring it to you when it happens.
All right, we'll get right back to you when it happens. Thank you, Carolyn Gusoff, live outside the federal courthouse.